I, too, would have been unable to reach my potential without a nemesis like Karpov breathing down my neck and pushing me every step of the way. When a new generation of chess players emerged in the 90s, and Karpov ceased to be the main threat to my dominant position, I had to refocus and find new sources of inspiration. So I dedicated myself to fighting back against the new wave of talented young stars, something few world champions had managed to do for long. Without Karpov to focus my energies on, I became more heavily involved with chess politics and sponsorship activities. This period also marked my increased involvement in computer chess and other exhibitions. Not until 1998, after my loss to IBM's computer Deep Blue, did I realize I had become distracted from chess. I rededicated myself to working harder than ever on my game and on beating human opponents. The results were evident, and despite my match loss to Kramnik in 2000, I played some of the best chess of my life in the years 1999 to 2001. Every good player has his or her own methods. After a 50-year career, the amazing Viktor Korchnoi has kept his competitive fires burning and is still playing high-level chess well into his 70s. Viktor the Terrible has led a difficult and colorful life both on and off the board, defecting from the USSR in 1976 after years of battles with the Soviet authorities. He became even more of a thorn in their side after he fled to the West, first to the Netherlands, and then to his current home in Switzerland. It became difficult for the Soviet censors to keep the defector's name out of the news when he was winning so many tournaments and defeating the top Soviet players. 3 times he faced the much younger Karpov in world championship contests, failing each time, but comforting himself with his bittersweet title, strongest player never to become world champion. Korchnoi has had a revenge of sorts by continuing to play competitive chess, while Karpov, 20 years younger, has largely retired from the rigors of tournament play. When he was the age at which I retired, Korchnoi was not yet at his peak. Despite his impressive career, Korchnoi has always been able to play as if he has something more to prove. Defying age is not nearly enough for him. He is not content just to turn up and move the pieces around. Korchnoi enjoys showing players a half-century his junior that they still have something to learn from him. At a tournament in 2004, Korchnoi defeated the Norwegian prodigy Grandmaster Magnus Carlsen, a triumph of a 73-year-old over a 14-year-old. Korchnoi has maintained his drive by refusing to look back at what would be the glory days for just about anyone else. He is still driven by the game of chess, and by an earnest desire to beat his opponent, not merely to do his best. Korchnoi is an inspiration to me, because I also believe it's essential to have benchmarks in our lives to keep us alert. In chess and other sports, we have ratings, opponents, and tournaments, so things seem clear. But as I've left the professional world of chess, I see that more is required. Regardless of the methods we use to motivate ourselves, we have to create our own goals and standards, and then keep raising them. It can feel a bit paradoxical to muster up the confidence that we are the best, but still compete as if we were outsiders and underdogs. But that's what it takes. It is just as hard to change a working formula, but anyone who wants to excel over a long career will find it necessary to do both things. Nurture your inherent strengths, but be nimble enough to develop new avenues of attack. Despite having won 8 gold medals over 3 Olympics, Carl Lewis still wanted more at the age of 35. To qualify for the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta, he embarked on an entirely new training program, leaving behind everything that had worked for him. He knew that his age and injuries created new challenges. He went on to win another gold in Atlanta, and he did it by not being afraid to change what worked. Finding ways to maintain our concentration and motivation is the key to fighting complacency. Maybe you don't have a rating system at work or at home the way professional chess or tennis players do, but that doesn't mean you can't develop one. What metrics can you contrive to measure your performance? Certainly, money can be valued and easily measured, but it can't be the only thing. Perhaps you should create your own happiness index, which can be as simple as a mental or actual list of things that motivate you and give you pleasure and satisfaction. Before you can fight, you have to know what you are fighting for. Every parent says he or she wants to spend more time with his or her kids. But how many people actually know, down to the hour, how much time they do spend together each week, each month? How many hours at work do you waste playing solitaire or surfing the web? What if you kept track and knew the answer? Then you would have a target to pursue. Most of us need to develop a more helpful technique than the vague promise of the cliché, just do it. Anticipating Nike's ad agency by 2 centuries, Goethe wrote, "Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do." In favor of contradiction. The motivation to question our methods can come from within, or it may come from without. In the business world, only an unusual boss will hire employees who approach things differently and who will challenge his ideas and practices. It takes great willpower and self-confidence to surround ourselves with smart, talented people who we know will confront us. No one enjoys being contradicted or corrected. There's a constant risk of losing authority or creating an anarchy of mixed messages. But the leader who is willing to risk these things has the potential for extraordinary success. These people are extraordinary because they have overcome the dread of being challenged, which is the same as the childish fear of simply being wrong. This fear can be crippling to your development and success. I've learned from my years of playing competitive chess to trust in my ability to use the opposition to make myself stronger and to gather more information about the process at hand. Whenever you feel threatened, remember the words of Emerson, who wrote, "Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming that I am persecuted whenever I am contradicted." Feudal and caste systems have just about died out in most nations across the globe, but they are alive and well in the chess world. National and international federations establish classes and categories based on a complex rating system that allows players to compete for prizes against opponents who are at a similar level. First category players aren't allowed to participate in the second category competition, any more than a 20-year-old could play in the under-12 championship. Of course, there are no restrictions in the opposite direction. An ambitious novice is free to get killed in the open section, where the highest-rated players compete. So no one could complain that it was unfair when I won the Soviet national under-18 tournament at the age of 12. If it is challenges that help us improve, why then, apart from prize money, doesn't everyone want to play in the open section of a tournament? There's no doubt about it. You'll learn more from 9 losses to strong opponents than from 6 wins and 3 losses against players who are at roughly your own level. The same thing holds true with players who don't attend tournaments but play against chess software. A PC program at its maximum strength will wipe out any casual player without mercy. Ironically, the main task of chess software companies today is to find ways to make the program weaker, not stronger, and to provide enough options that any user can pick from different levels, and the machine will try to make enough mistakes to give him a chance. So how much of a chance should you ask for against the mighty machine? Every person has to find the right balance between confidence and correction. But my rule of thumb is, lose as often as you can take it. Playing in the open section and going 0 for 9 every time is going to crush your spirit long before you get good enough to make a decent score. Unless you have a superhuman ego, or totally lack one, a constant stream of negativity will leave you too depressed and antagonized to make the necessary changes. But as much as you enjoy winning, remember that winning every time is not ideal. Setbacks and losses are both inevitable and essential if you're going to improve and become a good, even great competitor. The art is in avoiding catastrophic losses in the key battles. This same principle also applies in the real world, where if you're well insulated by your supporters and staff, you can believe that you are right virtually all of the time. It's not only dictators and pharaohs who are always right. Politicians and CEOs tend to both attract and hire like-minded staffers and employees. They gain energy by talking with their avid supporters and accuse critics of not being supportive. When things go wrong, they assign the blame to others. It is dangerously easy to go from succeeding in business or politics because you are often correct to surrounding yourself with others who tell you you are correct because of who you are. The difference between better and different. If you learn to accept criticism and invite your people to present new information, particularly that which may contradict an idea or practice that you hold dear, you will quickly learn to adopt new and potentially powerful methods into your game plan. Learn to see value in other methods and take what you need from them to improve, but not necessarily replace, your own. Chapter 12. The Inner Game. The game can be won before you get to the board. South American liberator Simón Bolívar said, "Only an inexperienced soldier believes that all is lost after being defeated for the first time." In the weeks and months after my nemesis Vladimir Kramnik took the World Championship title from me in November 2000 in London, I had plenty of time to absorb exactly what Kramnik had achieved and how he had done it. I spent hours identifying and analyzing the weaknesses of mine that he had exploited, and hours more figuring out how to turn the tables on Kramnik and exploit his flaws. We played over a dozen games after that match, all of them draws but one. The lone victory was mine. That win came in the final round of a super tournament, and I had to win that game if I was to overtake Kramnik for first place. Ironically, his opening was the very same Berlin defense that had so frustrated me in the all-important London match. That, along with the substantial lead I had managed to maintain in the rankings, gave me a small bit of consolation. All that time I had spent finding the holes in my game paid off with a satisfying victory against Kramnik. But even more important, it was an essential part of my psychological recuperation after the loss of my World Championship title. Getting back into the ring after a bruising loss is never easy, especially when you know that your opponent has been emboldened by your perceived weakness. That's why I always think of Simón Bolívar, and remember that the experienced soldier who studies the battlefields in the aftermath of the war returns with both wisdom and renewed courage. Few things are as psychologically brutal as serious chess. You spend 5 or 6 hours in total concentration, at war with another mind. In the background is a ticking clock. There is nowhere to hide, and you have no teammates to toss the ball to, no referees to blame, no dice to roll, or new cards to turn over. Chess is often called a 100% information game because both players know everything that is going on all the time. When you lose, it's because the other player beat you. Plain and simple. In this, chess has much more in common with boxing than other sports or games. As my 1993 World Championship challenger Nigel Short once said in an interview, chess is ruthless. You've got to be prepared to kill people. You can't overestimate the importance of psychology in chess, and as much as some players try to downplay it, I believe that winning requires a constant and strong psychology, not just at the board, but in every aspect of your life. The storm before the calm. It begins with intense preparation, which requires that you motivate yourself to work long, grueling, lonely hours. It often feels like a Sisyphean task, since you know that perhaps only 10% of your analysis will ever see the light of day. And then the game is imminent. The adrenaline is flowing, and you're in a battle to control your nerves and fears. Some players lose sleep or appetite. Some do last-minute preparation and focus on the game, while others watch a movie or take a walk to clear their head. I always knew something was wrong if I wasn't on edge before a game. Nervous energy is the ammunition we take into any mental battle. If you don't have enough of it, your concentration will fade. If you have a surplus, the results can be explosive. Several times in my career, I had an extraordinary feeling before a game that no matter who my opponent was or what he did, I was going to tear him limb from limb. This happened in 1993 before my game with Karpov in the Linares Spain tournament. Even though I was playing with the slight disadvantage of the black pieces, I was bouncing off the walls in anticipation. I had a strange feeling that something phenomenal was going to happen. My old rival Karpov and I were tied for first place with only 4 rounds to play. My trainer, Sergei Makarichev, sensing how optimistic I was, boasted before the game that I was going to wipe Karpov out this time. Indeed, that was what happened, although no one could have predicted the comedic twist at the conclusion. After sacrificing a pawn and seizing the initiative, I reached a dominating position. My pieces quickly pushed Karpov's back against the first rank, which was highly unusual. On move 24, I promoted a pawn, announcing queen, and looking over to the referee with the implied request that he deliver me a second queen. But before I received the referee's response, Karpov played an illegal move. He claimed that since I hadn't yet actually placed a new queen on the board, he could choose which piece my pawn would be promoted to, and that he chose a bishop, a much weaker piece. The little farce was quickly resolved. I got my new queen, and Karpov resigned 3 moves later. That win was part of a 5-game stretch I consider one of the best series of tournament rounds of my life. 4 wins and a draw against the world's top players to clinch the tournament victory. In hindsight, I know that much of the credit for that win goes to the dynamic of psychology. I went into the tournament with a premonition of victory, and there is much more to that than simply the power of positive thinking. Creative and competitive energy is a tangible thing, and if we can feel it, so can our opponents. Don't get distracted while trying to distract. Like just about everyone on Earth, real chess players fall between the literary caricatures of the ultra-rational James Bond villain Kronstein and Vladimir Nabokov's psychotic Luzhin. In my experience, most of them are bunched toward the rational end of the bell curve, but there are notable exceptions. The incredible story of Viktor Korchnoy's 1978 World Championship match against Anatoly Karpov in the Philippines is enough to make anyone wonder if chess players might indeed be crazy. Tensions between the two sides were at a peak before the match even began. The hated defector Korchnoi was challenging the full might of the Soviet machine and its champion Karpov. Countless petty protests were filed by both sides before they started the first game. They argued about the flags on the table, the height and style of the chairs, the color of the yogurt Karpov ate during the games. But none of these were as bizarre as the story of Dr. Vladimir Zukar, a psychology professor who came to Baguio City as part of Karpov's entourage. Zukar sat in the audience and stared directly at Korchnoi during every game of the World Championship. His association with Karpov and his disconcerting mien led the superstitious Korchnoi and his overprotective team to suspect foul play of a supernatural kind. Zukar was accused of being a parapsychologist who was attempting to disrupt Korchnoi's thinking. Korchnoi's team asked that Zukar not be allowed to sit too close to the stage, while the Soviets fought every request and responded with their own demands. Thus began a bizarre escapade that saw Zukar changing seats daily, often flanked by members of Korchnoi's delegation. Prior to Game 17 of the match, Korchnoi even refused to play unless Zukar moved farther back, a protest that cost the challenger 11 minutes on his clock, time he could later have used when he found himself in severe time trouble. Later, Korchnoi brought in his own parapsychologist, neurologist, and hypnotist to combat Zukar's powers. The saga continued in similar fashion throughout the match. Was it all posturing? Or is it really possible that the 2 greatest chess players on the planet and their closest associates were distracted by such sideshows during the most important match of their careers? Karpov won the final game, with Zukar sitting up front to win the 32-game match by a single point. I often wonder how much better Korchnoi would have done if he hadn't invested so much energy responding to Karpov's provocations and speculating about whether Karpov was receiving secret messages in his yogurt. Incidentally, Karpov's first victory came in Game 8 after he startled his opponent and the fans by refusing to shake Korchnoy's hand before the game. Another psychological gambit well played? Breaking the spell of pressure. Years of competition got me used to the tension that came with each game and important event. It wasn't so easy for me at the start of my career, however. In January 1978, at the age of 14, an aging prodigy, I participated in the Sokolsky Memorial Tournament in Minsk with the hopes of earning a score good enough to qualify for my master title. I also needed to follow up my junior successes. After clinching 2 consecutive national junior titles, I had failed to win the World Under-16 Championship in 1976 and 1977. Meanwhile, my closest junior rival, Artur Yusupo, had just won the World Under-20 title. Making matters worse, I would be a conspicuous outsider at the tournament. It was highly unusual for a junior to be invited to play in a strong event in another Soviet republic. From Azerbaijan to Byelorussia, in this case. I was allowed to play only at the insistence of my mentor Botvinnik, so success was critical for both our reputations. And to cap it all off, I was a bit scared of some of my experienced opponents. My mother came up with an idea. "Garrick," she told me the day before the first round, "you can do well here, but before each game, I want you to memorize some lines from Pushkin's poem Eugene Onegin. It will sharpen your senses." I followed her advice, and Onegin became the magic feather that distracted me from my anxiety. I won my first games, and my confidence returned. In the end, I not only scored enough points to qualify for my master title, but I also won the tournament, with a little help from our national poet. I can still recall the opening lines, albeit in Russian, of course. "My uncle, high ideals inspire him, but when past joking he fell sick, he really forced one to admire him, and never played a shrewder trick. Let others learn from his example." Feeling uneasy under pressure is completely natural. When we begin to feel nonchalant about new challenges, it may be time to worry. If everything seems easy, you aren't pushing yourself hard enough. If you don't keep up your psychological strength, you won't be able to respond well when faced with setbacks. Psychological muscles atrophy from disuse, just as physical and mental ones do. If it has been a while since you experienced the nervous thrill of trying something new, perhaps you've been avoiding a challenge for too long. We all need a regular diet of change, as well as a healthy nervous energy to maintain our defenses. We must have those defenses in good working order when failure strikes. It is difficult to learn from a tough loss and still come out the next day believing we are the best. It takes a strong mind to balance these somewhat contradictory storylines, especially after a particularly crushing defeat. Our theory of mind over matter can also work against us if we are convinced things are hopeless. One defeat quickly leads to another, then another. This can happen over a single tournament or even a career, falling into a rut of failure. Staying objective when the chips are down. In my 1986 championship match with Karpov in Leningrad, I was well in the lead when I suddenly crashed with 3 losses in a row, leaving the match tied with 5 games remaining. After the 3rd loss in Game 19, I had an emergency session with my coaches about what to do with white in the next game. Should I force a quick draw to stabilize myself and recover, or should I fight on as usual? "Why not fight?" I said. "I've just lost 3. How could I possibly lose 4 in a row?" Grandmaster Mikhail Gurevich, who has plenty of experience in both chess and casinos, reminded me that playing the odds that way doesn't work. When you play roulette, you can lose many times in a row by betting on black every time. It's sad but true, and it's a lesson worth attending to in every enterprise in life. It makes no sense to believe that faring poorly now means you'll do better later. There are no cosmic scales that will eventually balance out on their own. I took his advice and made a short draw in Game 20, drew Game 21, and then, fully recovered, scored a crushing victory in Game 22 to retake the lead and hold on to my title. Casinos often put up digital signs next to roulette wheels that display the last dozen winning numbers. encouraging people to believe that they can gain an advantage with this information, when in reality, it is worthless. The wheel doesn't know how the last spin came out. It is dangerous to fool ourselves into believing that something is due to happen when there is no relation between the events of the past and what could occur in the present. To believe the casino is to do little more than to follow superstition. Pretenders to the crown and fatal flaws. Along with the eternal "who was the greatest ever" debate, one of the most popular discussions at chess clubs or on the internet message boards is who deserves the dubious title of greatest player never to be world champion. Throughout chess history, we encounter great players who came close but never ascended to chess Olympus. These legends were not lacking in chess skills, and indeed they created many of the game's enduring masterpieces. But for one reason or another, they were never awarded the ultimate honor. When we ask why these great players never quite made it to the top, we have to go beyond shrugging our shoulders and blaming it on fate. It's not always clear precisely where to place the blame, and each case is different and offers insight into the psychology of failure. Supporters of the dynamic Russian player Mikhail Chigorin can't say he didn't have his chances. Twice he jousted for the world championship against Wilhelm Steinitz toward the end of the 19th century, and both times he lost. Throughout his career, Chigorin fought against the conventional wisdom, sometimes to a fault. He was never able to fully harness his wild creativity. Once he fixated on an idea, his theoretical point became more important to him than winning, and this lack of competitive pragmatism prevented him from making it to the top. Chigorin teaches us that we cannot sacrifice results to a blind belief in our methods, no matter how innovative they may be. I see in him a tendency, which many have, to respond to a setback by telling himself that he didn't follow through enough, that if only he had gone even further in the same direction, things would have turned out better. The lesson here is that you must rely on your inner observer to look at your results dispassionately and to push your ego aside long enough to fully and rigorously question your approach. Had Chigorin been able to rein in his fantasy on just a few occasions, the world might have had its first Russian champion decades before Alekhine. If any chess player can be forgiven for cursing the fates, it would be Akiba Rubinstein. Now, nearly a century after he joined the elite, the quality of his chess is still above reproach. But a certain sporting impracticality cost him dearly on more than one occasion. Rubinstein was unwilling or unable to consider both the larger tournament situation as well as the game at hand, and he lost sight of the big picture and took unnecessary risks. If he only needed a draw to finish first, his nature would still push him to play a complicated winning attempt that might end in disaster. But his more consequential failings were away from the board. A championship contender in the early 20th century needed charisma and a knack for cultivating sponsorship, and Rubinstein was the epitome of the shy and unsocial chess player. So, despite his many tournament successes, Rubinstein never succeeded in putting together the money that was needed to challenge Lasker. The timid Pole just wasn't capable of the kind of posturing and heated public exchanges that guaranteed a place at the table. The bold Cuban Capablanca soon surpassed him as the #1 contender. It's true that in chess, as in politics, fundraising and glad-handing matter. Only in an ideal world does the most qualified candidate win the election. In the real world, the moment you believe you are entitled to something is exactly when you are ripe to lose it to someone who is fighting harder. Rubinstein wasn't the only leading player to retire without getting a shot at the World Championship. Paul Keres spent decades in the highest ranks of chess before and after the Second World War. The Estonian-born Soviet's opportunity to challenge for the title was hindered by the outbreak of war. But after the war ended, Keres lost out again because the Soviet authorities preferred the good Russian Botvinnik, and they allowed him to advance. Fate aside, however, Keres had multiple chances to qualify for the World Championship, and always came up short. I cannot assign any particular failing to his chess, but because of his track record, I am skeptical that he would have been a match for Botvinnik under the bright lights of the World Championship stage. David Bronstein did earn a shot at Botvinnik. Their 1951 match ended in a draw, and because chess traditionally entitles the incumbent to draw odds, that is, the champion keeps the crown if the match is drawn, Botvinnik retained his title. Even after, Bronstein liked to tell his students that if he hadn't lost the penultimate game of that match, they would listen to him as if to the Oracle of Delphi. The young Bronstein arrived at his match against the living legend Botvinnik, having already achieved for him a great victory just by reaching the championship match. Bronstein was the most creative player of his generation, and he seemed to have all the ingredients necessary to bring down the world champion. But having set his sights on reaching the final, he found it impossible to raise them to winning the match itself. Taking pride in our achievements mustn't distract us from our ultimate goals. A marathoner who makes good time over 26 miles isn't going to get credit unless he finishes the last 385 yards. After reaching the heights, Bronstein was unable to maintain his concentration and play his best chess. He committed several of the worst errors of his career during his match with Botvinnik. A defeat can be doubly damaging when we feel we've done our best and still failed. This is contrary to every parent's words of consolation to a child whose soccer team has lost. You did your best. We are supposed to feel better knowing that even if the outcome wasn't positive, we couldn't have done any more. And yet, someone with aspirations to be the champion of the world does not want to hear that he did his best and was still convincingly beaten. Indeed, could there be anything worse? Thomas Szasz, the famous anti-psychiatrist, wrote, "There is no psychology. There is only biography and autobiography." I think of that statement, and I'm reminded as a chess player that results are what matter in the end. We don't live our lives with motivational tricks and ploys. We cannot fool ourselves for long. Perhaps those who fail under pressure are those who believe too much in their methods of motivation and allow them to become a distraction. Overthinking can distract us from our concrete objectives. It comes down to making the best moves and reaching the correct decisions. To do this, we must accept responsibility for our results. Every decision we make builds our character and forms the basis of our future decisions. We must not be relegated to a supporting role in our own lives. The inner game is the game. It's not psychology. It is life as it should be lived, an autobiography in progress. Chapter 13. Man versus Machine. Enter the machines. One entity in the world is completely free of gender prejudice and preconceived ideas about who is stronger, men or women, and that is the computer. Throughout the history of mechanical and digital computing, chess has been near the forefront of designers' minds. As soon as man invents a machine, it seems the next step is to turn his creation into a chess player. One reason is that so many geniuses and inventors have played the game, maybe not brilliantly, but with passion and interest. Chess has always maintained a position as, in Goethe's words, a touchstone of the intellect. Just about everyone who created a thinking machine was quick to put it to the test of mastering the world's most respected game. The first chess-playing machine, known as the Turk, was introduced to the general public in 1769. The Hungarian engineer Baron Wolfgang von Kempelen created it for the amusement of the Habsburg Empress Maria Theresa. This purely mechanical device was hidden beneath a majestic mannequin dressed as a Turk. Predictably, it was a fake. Its outstanding playing strength was in fact supplied by a chess master cleverly secreted inside the device. The main challenge of chess programming is the large number of continuations involved. In an average position, there are about 40 legal moves. So if you consider every reply to each move, you have 1,600 positions. After 2 moves, there are 2.5 million positions. After 3 moves, 4.1 billion. The average game lasts 40 moves, so the numbers involved are beyond astronomical. Remarkably, the first computer program was written before a computer existed that could run it. Its creator was Alan Turing, the British mathematician who led the group that broke the German Enigma code during World War II, and is widely considered the father of modern computer science. He developed a series of instructions for automated chess play, but since there was as yet no machine that could execute this first-ever chess code, Turing worked through it himself on paper. Around the same time in the United States, another great mathematical mind, Claude Shannon, was outlining several strategies computers could use to play chess. In 1950, the nuclear laboratory of Los Alamos was the unlikely site of the next step forward in chess computing. When the gigantic machine Maniac 1 was delivered, the scientists tested it by writing a chess program. After playing against itself, and then losing to a strong player, despite being given an extra queen, the machine beat a young woman who had just learned the game. It was the first time a human had lost to a computer in a game of intellectual skill. The next advances came in the form of smarter programming, in which the developers taught the computer how to avoid wasting time considering inferior moves. The mathematical alpha-beta chess algorithm was developed, which allowed the program to rapidly prune out weak moves and see further ahead. This is a brute force method, now in universal use, in which the program stops evaluating any move that returns an evaluation score inferior to the score of the current first move choice. The first programs that used this method, running on some of the fastest computers of the day, reached a respectable playing strength. By the 1970s, early personal computers could defeat most amateurs. The next leap came from the famous Bell Laboratories. Ken Thompson, creator of the Unix operating system, built a special-purpose chess machine with hundreds of chips. His machine, which he named Bell, was able to search about 180,000 positions per second. Supercomputers at the time could only manage 5,000. Seeing up to 9 moves ahead during a game, Bell could play at the level of a human master, and far better than any other chess machine. It won just about every computer chess event from 1980 to 1983, before it was finally surpassed by giant Cray supercomputers. As the technology developed, new consumer chess programs with names such as Sargon, Chessmaster, and Fritz benefited in particular from the faster processors engineered by Intel. Dedicated machines made a comeback thanks to a generation of chess machines designed at Carnegie Mellon University. Professor Hans Berliner was a computer scientist as well as a world champion at correspondence chess, an ancient form of playing the game through the mail. His machine, High Tech, was later surpassed by the creations of his graduate students, Murray Campbell and Feng-Sung Hsu. They took their computer champion, Deep Thought, and joined IBM, where their project was rechristened Deep Blue. The Deep Blue machine that I faced in matches in 1996 and 1997, more on them in a moment, consisted of an IBM SP2 server equipped with a large number of special chess chips. This combination was capable of searching 200 million positions per second. Like all modern chess machines, Deep Blue also had access to a vast database of pre-programmed opening positions culled from human grandmaster play. Containing millions of positions, these opening databases imitate, and of course surpass, human knowledge and memory of the openings. By accessing these databases of moves, a program will play well over a dozen moves according to a preset routine before it begins to compute for the first time. Without the benefit of this human knowledge in the openings, the programs would be considerably weaker. Some databases are drawn into service only at the end of the game. These endgame table bases, another creation of Ken Thompson, record every possible position with 6 or fewer pieces. Some sets with 7 now exist, and their most efficient solutions. With the aid of these oracles, we have discovered positions that require over 200 accurate moves to force a win, a level of complexity previously undreamt of and still impossible for any human to master. Fortunately, the two ends, opening research and endgame databases, will never meet. So it is highly unlikely that anyone will ever see a computer play its first move and announce checkmate in 33,520 moves. And a child shall lead us. My first experiences with computers were far more pleasant than the more famous encounters we'll come to in a moment. In 1985, I was 22 years old and the recently crowned world chess champion. One of my new perks was an early personal computer, one of the few in my hometown of Baku. One couldn't do a great deal with it, as I recall, but it fascinated me just the same. One day, I received a package in the mail from a stranger named Frederick Friedel, a chess fan and science writer based in Hamburg, Germany. He sent me an admiring note and a floppy disk containing several computer games, including one called Hopper. Video games weren't yet the phenomenon they had become in the United States, and I enthusiastically took up this new challenge. I spent much of my free time over the next few weeks practicing Hopper and setting ever higher record scores. A few months later, I traveled to Hamburg for a chess event, and I made sure to look up Mr. Friedel at his suburban home. I met his wife and two young sons, Martin, age 10, and Tommy, age 3. They made me feel quite at home, and Frederick was eager to show me the latest developments on his own computer. I mentioned that I had completely mastered one of the little games he had sent me. "You know, I'm the best Hopper player in Baku," I said, omitting any mention of the total lack of competition. "What's your high score?" he asked. 16,000, I replied, a little surprised that this extraordinary number failed to elicit at least a raised eyebrow. "Very impressive, but that's not such a big score in this house." "What, you can beat it?" I asked. "No, not me." Okay, Martin must be the video game whiz." "No, not Martin." With a sinking feeling, I realized the smile on Frederick's face meant that the household Hopper champion was the 3-year-old. I was incredulous. "You can't mean Tommy." My fears were confirmed when Frederick led his little boy over to the computer and sat him down next to us as the familiar game loaded. Since I was the guest, they let me go first, and I rose to the occasion with a personal best of 19,000 points. My success was short-lived, however, as Tommy took his turn. His little fingers were a blur, and before long the score read 20,000, then 30,000. I figured I should concede defeat before we sat there watching through dinner time. My cause was clearly hopeless. Losing to a little kid at Hopper was easier on my ego than any loss to Karpov, but it still gave me food for thought. How was my country going to compete with a generation of little computer geniuses being raised in the West? Here I was, one of the few people in an entire Soviet city with a computer, handily outperformed by a German toddler. And what about the implications for chess? What if we could improve the way we study chess, the way we used our PCs to write letters and store records? This would be a powerful weapon, one that I shouldn't be the last to have. But my first opportunity to employ what I learned from this lesson wasn't related to chess. When I signed a sponsorship deal with the computer company Atari, I took as payment over 100 of their machines to bring back to a youth club in Moscow, the first of its kind in the Soviet Union. We couldn't be left in the Stone Age while Tommy and his nimble-fingered compatriots took over the world. I had also the chance to address the other issue with Frederick, how a home computer could be turned into a chess tool. Our conversations led to the creation of the first version of ChessBase, a name now synonymous with professional chess software, thanks to the company of the same name that Frederick co-founded in Hamburg. ChessBase was the result of embracing innovation and of being alert to the trends and the possibilities. And while Martin and Tommy have so far failed to take over the world, both are successful computer design and programming professionals. Kasparov versus Deep Blue. My 6-game matches against the IBM supercomputer Deep Blue in 1996 and 1997 received unprecedented attention around the world for a chess event. The official website of the 1997 rematch generated web traffic similar to that of the Atlanta Olympic Games. Newsweek ran a cover story titled "The Brain's Last Stand," and 1,000 subplots were developed. Was Deep Blue really artificial intelligence? Was I the defender of humanity? When it was all over, people debated the implications of my initial win in Philadelphia, my loss in New York a year later, and IBM's refusal to play a third deciding match. For those who may not remember how the whole thing played out, here's a brief summary. After my first match with Deep Blue in 1996 in Philadelphia received so much publicity, IBM threw its full weight behind a 6-game rematch in May 1997 to be held in downtown Manhattan. In 1996, I lost the first game of the match, but after that wake-up call, I came back to win 3 games and easily defeat the computer 4-2. For the rematch, IBM claimed Deeper Blue was twice as fast and much smarter. They had hired human grandmasters to work full-time teaching the computer by improving its evaluation function. The media attention for the first game of the rematch was beyond that of a world championship. Over 300 journalists were accredited, and the 500-seat auditorium sold out at $25 per ticket. Of course, I was nervous. Being human, I was unable to ignore all of these distractions, unlike my silicon opponent. But I played well enough to win the first game with white. The second game would, however, change the course of the match and of human-machine competition. I've talked about computers and their inability to make long-term plans. They calculate variations in a linear way, examining each move in turn, searching deeper and deeper. Even at Deep Blue's 200 million moves per second, it took it a long time to see far enough ahead to play competent strategic chess. It would occasionally make silly moves no strong human would consider, and it did this in its loss in Game 1. Game 2 was an entirely different matter. The machine played with the subtlety of a Karpov, especially at one key moment when I was desperately hoping to gain counterattacking chances. I attempted to sacrifice material for activity, but uncharacteristically for a machine, Deep Blue declined to win material. Instead, it played a quiet prophylactic move that ended my hopes, the sort of move no computer had ever before made. Instead of going for a short-term advantage, it closed in for the kill. Faced with a losing position and stunned by the godlike quality of the machine's play, I resigned. I soon received an even greater shock. It turned out that the final position of the second game was not a losing one for me after all. With its last move, the computer had blundered, and I had resigned in a drawn position. It felt like being kicked in the stomach after already being knocked down. When I was shown the drawing line, I realized that I would have continued on against any human. But during the game, I couldn't imagine the machine making such a mistake, and I had assumed my position was hopeless. I had completely psyched myself out. My feelings of embarrassment and anger were quickly joined by doubt and suspicion. How could Deep Blue play so fantastically well and then in the same game make such an elementary, for a computer, blunder? My mind began to reel with thoughts about just how far IBM might go to win. Would not billions of dollars in free, favorable publicity, IBM's words, be worth giving the machine a little human help at a key moment? Always one to speak my mind, I suggested this possibility in the press conference after the drawn third game. I should have considered that the uproar that followed would only heighten the tension, something that of course had no effect on my opponent. I missed a clear win in the fourth game, and by then I was exhausted and confused. Was something fishy going on? Or was Deep Blue really so strong? In the fifth game, I again missed good winning chances, so the match remained tied with 1 win apiece and 3 draws. Everything was set for a showdown in Game 6. But looking back today, I see my fate had already been sealed. It took only 19 moves for me to resign the worst game of my career and lose the match. I was simply in no condition to play chess by that point, and I made an infantile blunder in the opening. After a few more feeble moves, the game and the match were over. I was ashamed of my performance, and for letting the mysterious second game get to me. Worse than the loss of the final decisive game was IBM's blow to the scientific and chess communities by deciding to immediately shut down the Deep Blue project. For half a century, chess had been considered a unique field for the comparison of the human and machine minds, of intuition versus calculation. To this day, the 6 games I played with the multi-million-dollar machine are the only ones ever made public. It was as if they had gone to the moon and not taken pictures. The tragedy of IBM's hurried dismantling of Deep Blue overshadowed their disappointingly questionable behavior during the match. IBM was not only my opponent at the board in the 1997 rematch, but also the organizer of the event. There was so much antagonism, with so many unanswered questions about what was going on behind the scenes, that it was hard to avoid coming up with conspiracy theories. I don't have any proof of foul play, but I feel they didn't prove much either thanks to their decision to terminate their creation. I live in doubt. Before I am accused of being a sore loser, I will plead guilty to the charge. I hate losing, especially when I don't understand the reason for the loss. When we analyze those 6 games today, we find that on the whole, Deep Blue was inferior to today's PC programs. Only in a few key moments did the IBM computer play extraordinarily subtle moves that even today make one question how they emerged from the same machine that lost Game 1 and blundered at the end of Game 2. We have discussed the importance of preparation, and this was another illustration of the incomplete nature of this famous chapter in the man-machine saga. Going into the match, Deep Blue was a complete unknown to me, a black box, literally and figuratively. But they could and did analyze every one of my games and customize Deep Blue's play to exploit that advantage. The closed nature of the contest created the potential for human interference. Although in the pre-Enron era, it sounded like paranoid folly to suggest that a corporate giant might resort to subterfuge to gain publicity and a huge surge in its stock price. Despite these remaining sour feelings, I was amazed at the enormous appeal the match clearly had for the general public. I knew I wanted to continue the adventure, although in the future, the environment would need to be much more open and scientific. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. My enthusiasm for finding new ways to use computer technology to promote the game of chess did not disappear when IBM pulled the plug on Deep Blue. In 1998, I turned to a new experiment dedicated to enabling humans to fight along with machines instead of against them. Grandmasters play chess by combining experience with intuition, backed up with calculation and study. Computers play chess by brute calculation. Their study consists of a gigantic database of opening moves. At present, there is a rough equilibrium between these methods. The best computers play at around the same strength as the best humans. As microprocessors have got faster, humans have learned new tricks to expose the weaknesses of computer play. Inevitably, the machines must win, but there is still a long way to go before a human on his or her best day is unable to defeat the best computer. The concept of advanced chess illustrates the costs and benefits of human plus computer collaboration. I developed this game as a way of answering the elusive but fascinating question, what would a combination of human intuition and computer calculation produce on the chessboard? Would they combine into an invincible centaur or an uncoordinated Frankenstein's monster? In June 1998, with 2 powerful computers at their sides, 2 grandmasters, Vasilin Topalov and I, faced off across the board in the first match of its kind. Although I had prepared for the unusual format, our 6-game match was full of strange sensations. We all use computer programs in our analysis and training, so we know what they are capable of and what their weaknesses are. But having one available during play was as disturbing as it was exciting. Being able to access a database of a few million games meant we didn't have to strain our memories nearly as much in the opening. But since we both had equal access to the same database, the advantage still came down to creating a new move at some point and making sure it was better than what had been played before. In the middle game, having a computer running meant never having to worry about making a tactical blunder. We could concentrate more on deep planning instead of the precise calculations that take up so much of our time in regular games. Again, since we were both using computers, it was a matter of how well we used them to check our plans and whose plan was more effective. As when I played against Deep Blue, there would be no way back if I made an error. The machine would not forgive any mistakes by making one of its own in return. It was difficult to find the best way to utilize the machine's abilities. I felt I was in a race to check the validity of the computer's evaluation. It gives its opinion instantly, but its recommendation changes as its analysis goes deeper and deeper. Just as a good Formula One driver really knows his own car, so did we have to learn the way the computer program worked. There is a strong impulse to unquestioningly follow the machine's evaluation if the move it recommends looks like something the computer would usually play well. That's a dangerous habit. Despite the human plus machine formula, my games with Topalov were far from perfect, mostly due to the unforgiving clock and the intense time pressure we were under. Toward the end, we had no time on our clocks to consult the machines for more than a few seconds. Putting that flaw aside, the results were interesting. Just a month earlier, I had defeated the Bulgarian 4-0 in a match of regular rapid chess. Our advanced chess match finished in a 3-3 draw. An important benefit of advanced chess is that the computer creates a log of every variation the players examined during play. This leaves a diary of the player's thoughts throughout the game, which is both fascinating for online spectators and immensely valuable as a training tool. Normally, it is forbidden to take any notes during a game, but in advanced chess, we provide a complete map of the path the game took through the players' minds. The experiment continued in Leon in later years with other players, and in 2005, the ethos of advanced chess found its true home on the internet. The online site, playchess.com, hosted what they called a freestyle chess tournament, in which anyone could compete in teams with other players or computers, whichever they prefer. Lured by the substantial prize money, groups of strong grandmasters, working with several computers at the same time, entered the competition. At first, the results seemed predictable. The teams of human plus machine totally dominated even the strongest computers. The mighty chess machine Hydra, which is hardware-based like Deep Blue, was no match for a strong human using a relatively weak laptop. Human strategic guidance, combined with the tactical acuity of a computer, was invincible. The surprise came at the conclusion of the event. The winner was revealed to be not a grandmaster with a souped-up machine, but a pair of amateur American chess players using 3 computers at the same time. Their skill at manipulating and coaching their computers to look deeply into positions effectively counteracted the superior understanding of their grandmaster opponents. Weak human plus machine plus superior process was greater than a strong computer and, remarkably, greater than a strong human plus machine with an inferior process. The freestyle winners had taken advantage of superior coordination of their contrasting methods and strengths. They understood their tools, human and machine, and figured out how best to get the most from them. A manager might say they built an effective team from a group of individuals with disparate skill sets. An army commander would recognize that a well-coordinated force will almost always triumph over a numerically superior enemy who lacks organization. A company with an efficient management structure or assembly line will often have better margins than a larger, less agile competitor. Process is critical, especially since its benefits multiply with each cycle. Staying out of the comfort zone. Opposite pairs working in harmony. This has become a theme of our quest to perfect decision-making. Calculation and evaluation, patience and opportunism, intuition and analysis, style and objectivity. At the performance level, these elements come together in management and vision, strategy and tactics, planning and reaction. Success comes from balancing these forces and harnessing their inherent power. And as we've heard again and again in this audio program, the only consistent method for achieving such a balance is to constantly seek to avoid our comfort zone. It's a bad habit to become over-reliant on one skill or way of doing things, just because it has in the past worked well for you. It's better to throw yourself off balance, as Topalov and I did in that first game of advanced chess. One of the lessons I took away from that match I think about almost every day. The one time you are surely learning something is when you are nervously attempting something new, even if it is simply solving a routine problem in a novel way. If you want an illustration of how deeply you are set in your routines, try brushing your teeth left-handed or putting on your trousers left leg first. Our mental routines are no less ingrained, and they have more profound consequences. Engaging with the weakest points in our game and drilling down so we really understand them is the best and fastest way to improve. Working to become a universal player, someone who can defend as well as attack, and is at home in any type of position, may not always have an obvious immediate benefit, especially if you are in a specialized field. But in my experience, working toward a universal style creates a rising tide that lifts all boats. Gaining experience in one area improves our overall abilities in unexpected, often inexplicable ways. I was lucky in that I was virtually forced by Anatoly Karpov to become a more positional, strategic player. It was sink or swim for me. Either I broadened my style and my understanding, or I wouldn't be able to beat him. The situation is not so clear for most people. We can go through our day-to-day lives without changing our habits, and nothing terrible will happen to us. The problem is that it is also highly unlikely anything at all will happen to us, including good things. Successfully avoiding challenges is not an accomplishment to be proud of. When I was in the 5th grade, the greatest mystery that school held for me was drawing. It seemed like an occult science. I just couldn't do it, and to this day I'm lousy at it. Instead of working at drawing as I did my other subjects, I thought, convinced my mother to do my drawing homework. She was quite good. In fact, she was good enough to catch the attention of my teacher with a fine picture she made of a bird in a tree. I could no sooner have drawn that myself than I could have painted the Mona Lisa. My teacher asked me if I would be interested in entering a drawing competition, in which I would have to perform in front of judges, not at home. If you think this is the end of the story, you haven't realized how proud and competitive I was even then. Instead of confessing, I spent the next few weeks at home training myself to draw the picture of the bird exactly as my mother had. I spent hours on it, reproducing it line by line as if memorizing a chemical formula. Eventually, I could manage a quite reasonable facsimile of the bird. Sweating nervously at the competition, I produced a creature that was almost identical to my mother's original. I have no doubt that that bird was and is the only thing I could draw in the world. Of course, now I wish I had done my drawing homework myself and actually learned to appreciate and cultivate the skill it requires. But even if I can't draw a picture, I did benefit from the lesson that experience offered. I stepped out of my comfort zone and pushed a bit at the boundaries of what I thought I could do. And it wasn't such a bad bird after all. It has long been fashionable to talk about left brain and right brain activities, even left-brained and right-brained people. But it doesn't require a discussion of brain science to understand how indulging our creative side and letting our minds wander in artistic pursuits can be enormously helpful in breaking us out of our problem-solving routines. The great physicist Richard Feynman offers an inspiring example of a brilliant man who pushed the boundaries and refused to be defined by his achievements in one particular area. When Robert Oppenheimer was in charge of the Manhattan Project, which produced the atomic bomb, he described Feynman as the most brilliant young physicist here. But he was also the greatest troublemaker. He saw everything as a challenge, as a puzzle to be solved. Feynman enjoyed picking the locks in the top-secret offices of Los Alamos just to see if he could. He became a serious amateur painter and musician and loved to perform as a drummer at Brazilian carnival celebrations. I have no doubt that Feynman's free spirit and playful mind were assets to his scientific work, not detriments. In his popular books, he insisted that science was a living subject, not just a cold set of formulas. He excelled in combining techniques and transforming a difficult problem into a comparable one that was easier to solve. This skill was directly related to his inclination to stay open to new ideas in every aspect of his life. Today, our society places great emphasis on specialization and focus. Students used to go off to university with the idea of broadening themselves. Now it has become a mostly vocational experience. Students use higher education as a means to develop a skill that will make them attractive to employers. We place so much emphasis on being good at what we do that we fail to realize that getting better at what we do might be best achieved by getting better at other and wildly different things. It sounds strange to say that being a better artist might make me a stronger chess player, or that listening to classical music can make you a more effective manager. And yet, this is exactly the sort of thing that Feynman had in mind when he said that being a drummer made him a better physicist. When we regularly challenge ourselves with something new, even something not obviously related to our immediate goals, we build cognitive and emotional muscles that make us more effective in every way. If we can overcome our fear of speaking in public, or of submitting a poem to a magazine, or learning a new language, confidence will flow into every area of our lives. Don't get so caught up in what I do that you stop being a curious human being. Your greatest strength is the ability to absorb and synthesize patterns, methods, and information. Intentionally inhibiting that ability by focusing too narrowly is not only a crime, but one with few rewards. My relationship with computers over the years has been contentious, but I readily acknowledge they have had a major impact on the way I think. Both playing against them and using them as an analytical tool forced me to recognize flaws in my decision-making. Like any tool, computers extend our reach and present us with new ways of solving old problems. They also present us with an entirely new set of problems, but this can be a blessing in disguise. Solving new problems is what keeps us moving forward as individuals and as a society, so don't back down.